The stranger fell to his knees before he reached the porch, but he still held both children close as if his own body were the only wall left between them and death. It was the summer of 1886 in Dry Creek, Kansas, and the land had not seen rain in nearly 4 months. The fields were brown, the wells were failing, and the hot wind carried dust through every crack in every house. Even the strongest ranchers had begun selling their cattle for almost nothing. Rebecca Lawson stood beneath the shade of her porch, holding a basket of dry beans against her hip. At 33, she had already buried a husband, fought through 2 hard winters alone, and watched the bank slowly close its hand around her small ranch. She had thought nothing could frighten her anymore. Then she saw the man lying in the dirt. A little girl stood beside him, holding his sleeve with both hands. She looked about 7 years old. Her yellow dress was torn at the knee, and her thin face was covered in dust. A small boy, no older than 3, rested weakly against the man's chest. The stranger tried to stand, but his legs failed him. He removed his worn brown hat and looked up at Rebecca. His face was burned by the sun, and his dark hair was wet with sweat. His cheeks were hollow from hunger. "Please," he said, his voice rough and broken, "feed my children." Rebecca stared at him. He did not ask for water. He did not ask for shelter. He did not ask for food for himself. The little girl swayed where she stood. Rebecca dropped the basket and rushed down the porch steps. She caught the child before she fell. The girl felt far too light in her arms. "When did they last eat?" Rebecca asked. The stranger lowered his eyes. "Yesterday morning," he said. "They shared 1 piece of bread." Rebecca looked at the boy. His lips were dry and cracked. His eyes were half closed, and he did not even cry. "What is your name?" she asked. "Caleb Morgan." "And the children?" "My daughter is Annie. My son is Luke." Rebecca looked toward the road behind them. No wagon, no horse, no supplies, only a long trail of footprints disappearing into the hot distance. "Can you walk?" she asked. Caleb nodded, but when he tried to rise, his hands shook. Rebecca placed Annie's arm around her shoulders. Then she pointed toward the open door. "Bring the boy inside." Caleb looked at her as if he had not understood. Rebecca's voice became firm. "Move before this heat kills all 3 of you." Inside the cabin, the air was cooler. Rebecca placed Annie on a wooden chair and filled a cup with water. She let the girl take only small sips at first. Caleb sat near the table with Luke in his lap. His hands never stopped holding the boy. Rebecca opened her small food chest. There was not much inside. A little flour, a jar of beans, 2 onions, half a loaf of cornbread. She had been saving it carefully. The bank expected payment before the end of the month. If she could not pay, Mr. Wade would take the ranch her husband had built with his own hands. Still, Rebecca lit the stove. She warmed bean soup and cut the bread into 4 pieces. When she placed the bowls on the table, Annie stared at the food as if she feared it might vanish. "Slowly," Rebecca said. "You will make yourself sick if you eat too fast." Annie nodded, but tears filled her eyes. Luke reached for the bread with both hands. Caleb gave his piece to the boy. Rebecca noticed. "There is enough for you," she said. He shook his head. "My children eat first." Rebecca placed another piece before him. "You will not help them if you fall dead on my floor." For a moment, Caleb said nothing. Then he picked up the bread and took a small bite. His eyes closed as he chewed. A tear rolled down his dusty face. Rebecca turned away and pretended to clean the stove. She did not want him to feel ashamed. The children finished their soup. Luke soon fell asleep against his father's chest. Annie sat quietly beside him, still holding the last piece of bread in her hand. Rebecca poured Caleb another cup of water. "How did you come to be walking through Dry Creek with 2 starving children?" she asked. Caleb looked down at Luke. "Our wagon broke near the Arkansas River. My horse died 2 days later. We have been walking since then." "Where is their mother?" The room became still. Annie lowered her head. Caleb's jaw tightened. "She died last winter," he said. Fever took her in a mining camp near Silver Bend. Rebecca felt a familiar pain rise inside her chest. Her own husband, Nathan, had died from a lung sickness almost 3 years earlier. He had been strong 1 month and gone the next. "I am sorry," she said. Caleb gave a tired nod. "I promised her I would keep them safe." His voice broke on the final word. Annie reached across the table and touched his hand. "You did, Pa," she whispered. Caleb looked at his daughter, but he could not answer. Rebecca walked to the window. Outside, the sun burned over the dead fields. The corn stood dry and yellow. The cattle pen was almost empty. She had sold most of the herd to make the last bank payment. Caleb followed her gaze. "This land is yours?" he asked. "It was my husband's. And now it belongs to the bank unless I find money before the end of the month." Caleb slowly stood. He placed Luke on the bench and covered him with his coat. Then he walked to the window. His weakness seemed to disappear as he studied the fields. He looked toward the old barn, the dry creek bed, and the broken windmill near the eastern fence. "How long has that well been dry?" he asked. "Since early spring." "Did anyone dig deeper?" Rebecca almost laughed. "With what money?" Caleb stepped outside. Rebecca followed him. He moved across the yard slowly, but his eyes were sharp now. He knelt beside the dry well and lifted a handful of dirt. He rubbed it between his fingers, then smelled it. He walked toward a line of cottonwood trees at the far edge of the property. Most were dying, but one still held green leaves. Caleb stared at it for a long time. Then he turned to Rebecca. "There is water beneath this land." Rebecca folded her arms. "Every man in Dry Creek says the water is gone. Every man in Dry Creek is looking in the wrong place." She studied him carefully. "What makes you so certain?" "I spent 12 years digging wells across Texas and Oklahoma territory. I know stone, I know soil. I know where water hides when the land turns dry." Rebecca looked toward the green cottonwood. Hope was a dangerous thing. She had learned that after Nathan died. Hope made a person believe just long enough for the world to hurt them again. Caleb stepped closer. "You saved my children today," he said. "You gave them food when you hardly had enough for yourself." Rebecca looked away. "I did what anyone should have done." "No," Caleb replied. "Most people turned us away." The words struck her harder than she expected. Caleb removed his hat. "Let us stay until the end of the month. Give my children a roof and enough food to become strong again. In return, I will dig you a new well." Rebecca stared at him. "And if you find nothing, then I will work until the bank takes the land." "That is not much of a promise." Caleb's blue eyes held hers. "I will find water." The hot wind lifted dust between them. Rebecca looked back toward the cabin. Annie stood in the doorway with Luke beside her. The little boy held the edge of his sister's dress. Both children watched silently, afraid their father might be told to leave. Rebecca's heart tightened. There was an old storage shed behind the barn. It had a roof, a small window, and enough room for 3 bedrolls. "You may stay in the shed," she said. "The children can eat with me." Caleb let out a slow breath. "Thank you. But understand this," Rebecca added. "Mr. Wade will not wait because you made a promise. He wants this land and he will take it if I miss the payment." Caleb looked across the dry fields. "Then we will give him a reason to fear losing it." That evening, Rebecca carried blankets to the shed. Annie helped spread them across the floor while Caleb repaired the broken door. Luke sat nearby, holding a wooden horse Rebecca found in an old chest. For the first time all day, the boy smiled. Rebecca watched Caleb look at his children. The love in his face was strong enough to hide his hunger, his fear, and his pain. When the children fell asleep, Rebecca returned with a bowl of soup. Caleb was sitting outside the shed, staring at the stars. "You already fed me," he said. "You gave half your supper to Luke. He needed it. So do you." Rebecca placed the bowl beside him. Caleb looked up at her. I will repay every kindness. You do not have to repay kindness. I do. His voice was calm, but something deep inside it made Rebecca stop. He looked toward the dark field. My wife died because I failed to find help soon enough. I will not fail these children again, and I will not fail you. The next morning, Rebecca woke before sunrise to the sound of metal striking earth. She stepped onto the porch. Caleb was already in the eastern field, digging beside the green cottonwood tree. He worked through the morning heat. He pulled stones from the ground and built a wooden frame around the opening. By noon, his shirt was soaked with sweat. Rebecca carried water to him. You need rest, she said. I have rested long enough. For the next 10 days, Caleb dug from sunrise until darkness. Rebecca fed the children and helped Annie mend clothes. Luke followed her through the garden, asking questions about every plant he saw. The quiet cabin slowly began to feel alive again. Yet the hole in the eastern field grew deeper, without a single drop of water. Then, on the 11th afternoon, a black carriage appeared on the road. Rebecca's stomach tightened. Mr. Wade stepped down wearing a clean gray suit. 2 large men climbed out behind him. He looked at Caleb, then at the deep hole beside the cottonwood. A cold smile spread across his face. You brought a starving drifter onto my land, he said. Rebecca stepped from the porch. This is still my land. For 19 more days. Mr. Wade walked toward the hole and looked down. You are wasting your time, he told Caleb. There is no water beneath this ranch. Caleb kept digging. Mr. Wade's smile disappeared. I said there is no water. Caleb stopped and slowly looked up. His face was covered in dirt, but his eyes were steady. You are afraid there is. For the first time, Rebecca saw fear flash across the banker's face. Mr. Wade stepped closer to the edge. You do not know what you are digging into, he warned. Caleb tightened his grip on the shovel. No, he said, but I believe you do. Rebecca stared at Mr. Wade. The banker's face had gone pale. And in that moment, she understood that Caleb's promise was not the only secret buried beneath her land. Mr. Wade stood beside the deep hole with his face drained of color, and Rebecca knew at once that the banker was hiding something. Caleb climbed out slowly, using the wooden ladder he had built against the wall of the shaft. His shirt was dark with sweat, and fresh cuts marked his hands. He stepped between Rebecca and the banker without fear. What is beneath this land? Rebecca asked. Mr. Wade straightened his coat. Nothing that concerns you. It concerns me if it is under my ranch. The banker glanced at the 2 men beside his carriage. Both wore heavy boots and hard faces. One rested his hand near the club hanging from his belt. Mr. Wade looked back at Caleb. You have until sunset to leave Dry Creek. Caleb wiped the dirt from his hands. I am not leaving. You are a drifter with no property and no standing in this county. I have a promise to keep. Mr. Wade gave a cold laugh. A promise will not stop the law. Rebecca stepped closer. Neither will threats stop us from digging. The banker's eyes hardened. You should be careful, Mrs. Lawson. Accidents happen on lonely farms. He turned toward the carriage. Before climbing inside, he looked again at the cottonwood tree. That single glance told Caleb everything. Mr. Wade knew water was there. After the carriage disappeared down the road, Rebecca faced Caleb. What did he mean? Caleb looked into the dark shaft. I do not know yet. But you believe he is hiding something. Yes. Rebecca folded her arms. You are not telling me everything. Caleb remained silent for a moment. The soil changed yesterday, he said. I found pieces of cut stone below the natural ground. Cut stone? Someone dug there before us. Rebecca stared at the hole. My husband never mentioned another well. It may be older than your house. Caleb climbed back down. Rebecca followed as far as the ladder allowed and watched him lift a flat stone from the wall. Beneath it was a narrow opening filled with packed dirt. He pushed the shovel inside and pulled out a rusted piece of iron. Rebecca took it from him when he climbed back up. It was part of an old chain. Caleb studied it. This was not left by a farmer. What was it used for? I cannot say. That night the wind became strong. Dust struck the cabin windows while Rebecca prepared supper. Annie cut potatoes at the table, and Luke played near the stove with his wooden horse. Caleb sat in a chair, while Rebecca wrapped cloth around his bleeding palms. You cannot dig tomorrow with your hands like this, she said. I can. You may be able to, but you should not. Caleb watched her carefully as she tied the cloth. You sound like my wife. Rebecca's hands stopped. I am sorry, he said. No, it is all right. He looked toward the children. Emily used to become angry when I worked through pain. She said I believed every problem could be defeated by breaking my own body. Was she right? Yes. Rebecca finished the bandage. And did you listen? Not often enough. A sad smile passed between them. Annie looked up from the table. Pa used to make Mama laugh when she was angry. Caleb smiled at his daughter. That was because your mother could never stay angry at a foolish man. For a few moments, the cabin felt warm and full. Rebecca listened to the children laugh and felt something open inside her that had been closed since Nathan's death. Then a loud crash came from the barn. Caleb rose at once. Stay inside. He took the lantern and hurried into the yard. Rebecca followed with Nathan's old rifle. The barn door hung open. Inside, several sacks of grain had been cut apart. Feed covered the floor. A water barrel had been smashed, and Caleb's tools were scattered in the dirt. Annie cried from the cabin doorway. Caleb knelt beside the broken tools. They want us to stop. Rebecca gripped the rifle. Then we dig faster. At dawn, Caleb repaired the tools. Rebecca joined him at the shaft. Together they removed dirt and broken stone. The children carried small buckets away from the opening. By afternoon, Caleb uncovered a stone wall deep beneath the ground. One section had been sealed with thick wooden boards. He struck the boards with his hammer. A hollow sound came from the other side. There is a chamber behind this, he said. Rebecca's heart began to pound. They removed the boards one at a time. A cold breath of air escaped from the darkness. Caleb lifted the lantern and crawled through first. Rebecca followed. The chamber was small and lined with stone. Old crates sat against one wall. A broken table stood in the center. Rusted tools and pieces of mining equipment lay across the floor. On the far wall was a faded map. Rebecca brushed dust from it. The drawing showed Dry Creek, the surrounding farms, and a dark blue line running beneath her ranch. Water, Caleb whispered. Several deep underground streams were marked across the paper. Rebecca's land sat above the largest one. There were names written beside the map. Mr. Wade's father was one of them. Caleb opened a wooden box beneath the table. Inside were old papers wrapped in oilcloth. Rebecca unfolded the first document. It was a land survey signed almost 20 years earlier. It proved that a deep water vein crossed the eastern side of her property. A second paper described a plan to buy the ranch cheaply during a future drought. Rebecca felt sick. Mr. Wade knew. He was waiting for the land to fail, Caleb said. He wanted me to believe it was worthless. Caleb opened another paper. His face changed. What is it? Rebecca asked. He handed it to her. The document carried Nathan Lawson's name. Rebecca read the words twice. Nathan had discovered the hidden survey before his death. He had written a letter accusing Wade's father of hiding the water map and stealing land from local ranchers. Rebecca's hands began to shake. Nathan knew about this chamber. Perhaps he planned to expose them. Why did he never tell me? Caleb looked at the date. This was written only days before he became sick. Rebecca leaned against the stone wall. For 3 years, she had believed Nathan's death was caused by natural illness. Now a darker question entered her mind. What if he did not die from sickness? Caleb's expression became serious. We should not accuse anyone without proof. But both of them were thinking the same thing. A sound came from above. Boots scraped against the ground near the shaft. Then Annie screamed. Caleb rushed toward the opening. Rebecca climbed behind him. When they reached the surface, one of Mr. Wade's men was holding Annie by the arm. The other had Luke beside the barn. "Let them go," Caleb said. The larger man smiled. "Mr. Wade wants the papers." Rebecca raised the rifle. The man tightened his grip on Annie. "You will not shoot while I hold the girl." Caleb stepped forward slowly. "Take me instead." "Pa, no," Annie cried. Caleb removed his knife and dropped it into the dirt. "I found the chamber. I opened the crates. You do not need the children." The man shoved Annie toward his partner and reached for Caleb. Rebecca fired into the air. The horse tied beside the barn reared in fear. Luke broke free and ran toward her. Caleb struck the first man in the stomach. The second released Annie and reached for his club. Caleb moved between him and the child. The club struck Caleb across the shoulder, but he did not fall. He drove his fist into the man's jaw. Both attackers fled toward their horses. The larger man turned before riding away. "Wade will burn this place before he lets you keep that map." Caleb dropped to one knee. Rebecca ran to him. Blood darkened his shirt near the shoulder. "You are hurt." "It is not deep." Annie wrapped her arms around his neck. Caleb held both children close. That evening, Rebecca locked the papers inside Nathan's old iron chest. Caleb wanted to ride into town and speak to the sheriff, but Rebecca stopped him. "Sheriff Cole owes Wade money," she said. "He may give the papers straight back to him." "Then we need someone outside Dry Creek." "There is a judge in Willow Ridge." Nathan trusted him. "How far?" "Almost 2 days by horse." Caleb looked toward the children. "I will leave before sunrise." Rebecca shook her head. "You are injured." "Wade knows we have proof. If we wait, he will come again." She knew he was right, but fear tightened around her heart. Caleb touched her hand. "I will return." The words carried more meaning than a simple promise. Rebecca looked into his blue eyes. "You had better." Before dawn, she packed bread, water, and the papers into a leather bag. Caleb hugged Annie and Luke beside the barn. "Stay close to Rebecca," he told them. Annie nodded bravely. Luke held up the wooden horse. "For luck, Pa." Caleb placed it in his coat pocket. Then he looked at Rebecca. "Do not dig while I am gone." "I make no promises." A small smile touched his face. He mounted Nathan's old horse and rode toward Willow Ridge. Rebecca watched until the dust swallowed him. The first day passed quietly. On the second evening, black clouds gathered in the west. The sky turned dark, but no rain fell. After midnight, Rebecca woke to the smell of smoke. She ran outside. The barn was burning. Flames climbed the walls, lighting the yard like sunrise. Annie carried Luke from the shed, while Rebecca pulled buckets from the well shaft. There was still no flowing water. Only damp earth at the bottom. Rebecca and Annie threw dirt against the flames, but the fire spread toward the cabin. Then Rebecca heard horses on the road. Mr. Wade rode into the yard with 4 men. He sat calmly in the saddle while her barn burned. "Where are the papers?" he called. Rebecca raised the rifle. "Far beyond your reach." Mr. Wade smiled. "Then your drifter will never make it back alive." The rifle trembled in Rebecca's hands. "What did you do?" Wade looked toward the dark road. "I sent men to meet him near Blackstone Pass." Rebecca's heart stopped. Caleb was riding straight into a trap. Mr. Wade sat on his horse while the barn burned behind him, and Rebecca understood that he had not come only for the papers. He had come to destroy every witness. Annie held Luke close near the porch. The little boy was crying, but Annie covered his mouth with her hand because she feared the men would hurt him. Rebecca kept Nathan's rifle aimed at Wade. "If Caleb dies," she said, "every person in this county will know you sent men after him." Wade smiled. "No one will believe a widow who is about to lose her land." A sudden crack came from the barn. One burning wall collapsed into the yard, sending sparks high into the black sky. Wade's men moved toward the cabin. Rebecca fired at the dirt in front of them. The horses jumped back. "Take one more step," she warned, "and the next bullet will not hit the ground." Wade's smile disappeared. "You cannot stop all of us." "No," a voice called from the road, "but she will not have to." Everyone turned. 3 riders appeared through the smoke. Caleb rode in front, one hand pressed against his bleeding side. Beside him was an older man in a dark coat. Behind them rode 2 county deputies. Rebecca's knees almost failed beneath her. Caleb was alive. Wade stared at him in disbelief. "You should be dead." Caleb slowly climbed down from his horse. "Your men made the same mistake you did," he said. "They believed fear would make me surrender." The older man rode forward. "I am Judge Samuel Pierce of Willow Ridge," he announced. "These deputies serve the territorial court." Wade looked toward the road. The men with him began backing away. Judge Pierce removed a folded paper from his coat. "I have seen the hidden land survey, the water map, and Nathan Lawson's written statement. I also have testimony from Caleb Morgan concerning the attack at Blackstone Pass." Wade pointed toward Rebecca. "She stole those papers." "They were found beneath her own land," the judge replied. "They belong to my family." "No," Judge Pierce said. "They prove your family cheated ranchers for nearly 20 years." The wind pushed flames toward the cabin roof. Rebecca lowered the rifle and rushed to the children. "We must stop the fire." Caleb ran to the unfinished well. He grabbed the rope and lowered himself into the shaft despite the wound in his side. Rebecca hurried after him. "What are you doing?" "The water is close. The barn is almost gone. If the fire reaches the cabin, you will lose everything." Caleb took the pickaxe and struck the stone at the bottom of the shaft. Once, twice, again. Rebecca stood at the opening, pulling dirt from the bucket as quickly as he filled it. Judge Pierce and the deputies dragged burning boards away from the house. Annie carried small buckets of dirt. Even Luke used his hands to throw dust against the sparks. Wade watched from his horse. He could have helped. Instead, he turned to escape. One deputy blocked the road. "You are not going anywhere." Wade pulled a small pistol from inside his coat. Before he could raise it, Caleb climbed from the shaft and threw the pickaxe handle across the yard. It struck Wade's arm. The pistol fell into the dirt. The deputies pulled him from the saddle and placed iron cuffs around his wrists. "You have no right," Wade shouted. Judge Pierce looked at the burning barn. "You threatened a widow, attacked a man on a public road, and set fire to occupied property. You will have time to explain your rights from a jail cell." Wade struggled against the deputies. "This land will still die," he yelled at Rebecca. "There is no water, there never was." Caleb stood beside the well, breathing heavily. Then a low sound came from beneath the ground. At first, Rebecca thought it was distant thunder. The sound grew louder. Stone cracked deep inside the shaft. Caleb looked down. "Move back." A rush of cold water burst through the broken wall beneath the earth. It filled the bottom of the shaft and climbed quickly. Caleb dropped the iron bucket into the opening and pulled it up. It was full of clear water. Rebecca laughed through her tears. They carried bucket after bucket toward the fire. The deputies joined them. Judge Pierce removed his coat and helped. Within an hour, the flames were under control. The barn was badly damaged, but the cabin still stood. Morning light spread across the burned yard. Wade sat in the back of a wagon with his hands chained. His expensive gray suit was covered in ash. The judge approached Rebecca. The court will stop the foreclosure until the land fraud is fully examined. Rebecca looked toward Wade. What about Nathan? Judge Pierce lowered his voice. His letter says he became ill after meeting Wade's father, but it does not prove he was poisoned. We may never know the full truth. Rebecca closed her eyes. The answer hurt, but it also gave her peace. Nathan had tried to protect the ranch. Now his words had finally done it. The deputies took Wade toward Willow Ridge. Caleb watched the wagon disappear, then lowered himself onto the porch step. Rebecca saw fresh blood on his shirt. You are wounded. It is only a cut. She opened his coat. A deep knife wound crossed his side. Rebecca's face went pale. Inside now. Caleb tried to stand, but his legs failed. Rebecca and Judge Pierce carried him into the cabin. For 3 days, Caleb burned with fever. Rebecca cleaned the wound, changed the bandages, and sat beside him through every night. Annie and Luke slept near the bed. Sometimes Caleb woke and asked whether the children had eaten. Every time, Rebecca gave him the same answer. They are safe. On the 4th morning, his fever broke. He opened his eyes and found Rebecca asleep in the chair beside him. Her hand rested over his. Caleb moved his fingers. Rebecca woke at once. You came back, she whispered. I promised. Tears filled her eyes. You nearly died keeping that promise. Caleb looked toward the window. The new well shone beneath the morning sun. Your ranch is safe now. Our ranch, Luke said from the doorway. Caleb looked at the little boy. Luke ran to the bed and climbed beside him. Annie followed more slowly. Rebecca says we can stay until you are well, Annie said. Caleb's expression became serious. And after that? The room fell quiet. Rebecca looked at the 2 children. During the past weeks, Annie had become like the daughter she had never had. Luke's small footsteps had filled the empty rooms with life. She could no longer imagine the cabin without them. Caleb sat up despite the pain. You gave us more than food, he said. You gave my children a home when the world had turned its back on them. Rebecca lowered her eyes. And you gave me a reason to fight for mine. Caleb reached for her hand. I have no money. I own no land. All I can offer is my work, my word, and whatever love remains in this tired heart. Rebecca looked at him. That is more than anyone has offered me in years. Annie smiled. Luke leaned close to Caleb. Ask her pa. Caleb gave a weak laugh. Then he looked directly at Rebecca. Will you let us stay? Rebecca's voice trembled. For how long? For every day you will have us. He took a slow breath. Rebecca Lawson, will you marry me? Tears rolled down her face, but she was smiling. Yes. Annie threw her arms around Rebecca. Luke cheered so loudly that Caleb laughed despite the pain in his side. They were married 2 months later beneath the green cottonwood tree. Judge Pierce returned to witness the ceremony. Neighbors from across the county came with bread, flowers, and lumber to rebuild the barn. The hidden survey helped many other families recover land that Wade's family had taken through lies. The banker was convicted of fraud, attempted murder, and setting the fire. The deep well changed Dry Creek. Caleb built a windmill above it and laid wooden pipes toward the fields. Rebecca planted corn again. Before autumn, green rows stretched across the ranch. Caleb also helped dig wells for other families. He never asked poor farmers for more than they could give. Sometimes they paid him with eggs. Sometimes with grain. Sometimes with only a meal and a place to sleep. He always accepted with respect because he remembered what it felt like to stand hungry at a stranger's door. Years later, Rebecca often watched Annie and Luke play near the cottonwood tree. More children joined them, and the quiet cabin became a full and happy home. One evening, Caleb stood beside Rebecca as the windmill turned above the fields. I came here believing I had nothing left, he said. Rebecca rested her head against his shoulder. You came here with 2 children and an impossible promise. You fed them before you knew my name. And you saved me before you knew whether water was truly there. Caleb smiled. The water was there. Rebecca looked toward the glowing windows of their home. So was the life we were meant to find. Their story began with hunger, fear, and a desperate father kneeling in the dust. But one bowl of food became an act of trust. One promise became a home. And the woman who thought she had lost everything discovered that sometimes the person who arrives needing to be saved is the one who changes your life forever.